Hi, everybody. Good afternoon and good evening, wherever and whenever you're watching here on the Captain Lou Sports Network and 12 Ounce Sports for another edition of Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History. Yours truly, Captain Lou here. Hope you had a great 4th of July weekend, had a lot of fun, got relaxed, ready to go, enjoyed it with family and friends. It was a great weekend, but now we turn our attention here on the program to our spotlight year, 2004. A lot of great champions crowned that year, including one that may have been a little bit of a surprise in the world of the NBA, and that was the 2004 Go to Work Detroit Pistons. Detroit, in the midst of a 5 straight year run to the Eastern Conference Finals and the first of two appearances in the NBA Finals, they took on the heavily favored Los Angeles Lakers, and we're going to talk all about that run. Joining us to talk about that in a few moments will be a special guest, one that we've had on our show numerous times on the Captain Lou Extravaganza. He's a basketball expert, savant, whatever you want to call him. He's been a coach. He still is, as a matter of fact, here in the Michigan area. And he knows a lot about baseball or basketball, knows a little bit about baseball too, but his forte is basketball, and can't wait to bring you the conversation we had with Coach Steve Finamore, and that's going to come up in a few moments. The Captain Lou Championship Years in Sports History podcast is brought to you, as always, by tickets.12ouncesports.com. We are indeed a ticket broker with baseball season in full steam here in July. You want to go to a ball game, Major League or minor league baseball, there's no better place to go to get your tickets than tickets.12ouncesports.com. And when you're there, use the promo code 12ounce and you'll get an even better discount. That's tickets.12ouncesports.com. And of course, we are brought to you by the official coffee of the Captain Lou Sports Network and the Captain Lou programming. That, of course, javicoffee.com. Make sure you check them out at javicoffee.com. They've got the best in instant coffee, all the flavors. You could drink it hot or cold. And when you go there, use the promo code Captain Lou at checkout, and you'll get 15% off of your purchase. That is Javi Coffee at javicoffee.com. The 2004 Go to Work Detroit Pistons, they're our spotlight in the month of July here as we spotlight the year 2004 on Captain Lou's championship years in sports history. We're going to take a look at them and a whole lot more with our special guest, Steve Finamore, right after this, here on Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History on 12 Ounce Sports and the Captain Lou Sports Network on YouTube. Hi, everybody. Captain Lou here from 12 Ounce Sports and, of course, the Captain Lou Extravaganza and Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History. Hey, if you're like me, you love to go to ball games, baseball, football, basketball, whatever, minor league baseball, especially this summer. There's nothing better than a Saturday night game, Major League or minor league baseball, Sunday afternoon. I've got the place for you to go to get those tickets for those games. Tickets.12ouncesports.com. We are a ticket broker, which means we don't charge you the exorbitant fees that you might see on some of those other secondary markets. Hey, if there's a concert you want to go to this summer, tickets.12ouncesports.com. Use the promo code 12ounce as well, and you'll get a better discount. Tickets.12ouncesports.com. It's that simple. Can't say it enough. For the best prices on tickets this summer, make sure you go to tickets.12ouncesports.com. Welcome back to Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History here on the Captain Lou Sports Network and, of course, 12 Ounce Sports. And with it being July of 2024, how we do it here on the program is we pick a different year each month, as we mentioned. So we're going to go to 2004, and we thought we would talk about the Go to Work Detroit Pistons, who, gosh, it's hard to believe it's been 20 years since they won that world championship. As we thought we would bring in a guest of the program. You've heard him on the Captain Lou Extravaganza talking NBA and college hoops, always full of knowledge. It's such a great time when we can have him on. The coach, Steve Finamore. Steve, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, Lou, I'm doing great, man. It's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to chatting about the Pistons from 2004 with you.
Yeah, it was an interesting year that year. Obviously, it wasn't a team that was a dominant team in the regular season, but I want to go back to the year before that, Steve, in 2003, in the playoffs. They finished that year, I believe they were 52-30. And the one stat that, well, there was two things that stood out to me about that year. Obviously, they had the lowest record or the worst record of a number one seed since I think the Portland Trail Blazers of 77. And they also, in that year, in that final year, was the only year that two old ABA teams made it to the finals, the Spurs and the Nets. And just a couple of crazy stats from that year.
Yeah, that was a weird year. A couple of things stood out to me when you and I had mentioned this a few nights ago. I went back, obviously did a little research to refresh my memory, and I just remember the Pistons getting rid of their coach, and the Nets swept them in the playoffs, I believe, right?
Yeah, they did. That was it was funny I think they had the Bucks in the opening round of that playoff, if I'm not mistaken, and they almost, or no, I beg your pardon. It was the Orlando Magic went up 3-2 on Detroit, and they were talking like the series was over, and Detroit stunned them in that 7 games. And then, of course, like you said, Detroit got swept, and then, Rick Carlisle got shown the door right after that. It was kind of crazy, and he ended up in Indianapolis or Indiana.
That was amazing. I remember watching Rick Carlisle coach those teams, and Carlisle's turned into a really good coach. He was a solid player. Just everything is about doing the right things and not really kissing anybody's behind.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about the playoffs, the Nets were really good too. They had Jason Kidd, Richard Jefferson, Kenyon Martin, and those guys, and that was a great series. But the next year, like you say, 2004 was awesome, man. That season,
and Larry Brown, of course, we all know, took over for Detroit, and he got fired as well, I think by the 76ers, if I'm not mistaken. So it's crazy, kind of deja vu all over again with the Pistons at 24, 25 or whatever, getting another coach that just got fired from a team earlier this year. So it's set up for an interesting offseason. And Steve, a cool thing looking back on it, some of the players on that 03 team for Detroit included Danny Manning. And of course, he retired right after that year, but I forgot he was on that Pistons team.
Yeah, it's funny the way these guys change teams today. Everyone talks about how they jump from team to team. They used to do that a lot back in the day too. People, with no social media and 24-hour sports round the clock. Sometimes a guy changes teams. You never really heard about it until you look back. You're like, wow, Danny Manning was on that team. And I was looking at that 2004 team. Darvin Ham was on that Pistons team.
Yeah,
and we all know it just happened to Darvin Ham, in LA. But yeah, I was looking at the roster too. Pepe Sanchez was on that Pistons team. Remember Pepe Sanchez?
Oh, I sure do. There's some crazy names, eh?
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So we get to the we get to the 2003-2004 season, for the Pistons, and you talk about some of the names they had. They had Bob Sura that got traded to Detroit, and of course he ended up later on that year getting traded to in the part of that Rasheed Wallace trade, and about the trade deadline. And Detroit started out pretty good that year, and then they kind of went through that lull. They started out hot, then they kind of did the dive there around the holidays, and it was an interesting year. They they had the pieces, Chauncey Billups, Richard Hamilton, and all that, but they ended up third in at the end of the year. But boy, oh boy, what a difference that trade made! It was such an interesting way they got Rasheed Wallace, because remember he played. What did he play? 1 game for Atlanta, and I think Detroit got him too. Wasn't that was crazy how that all turned out?
That turned their season around. I mean, I know they were cruising along, and like you said, they hit a bump in the road. They lost a couple of games, and then even when they picked up Wallace, I remember them losing their first game or second game, 2 games in a row they lost, and then they just turned it around. I saw a stat where they won 16 of their last 19 to finish the season. But Rasheed Wallace, you look back, and it's a story where it's kind of like the Isaiah Thomas story today when you think back to the Dream Team and all the things Isaiah did that people didn't like. But you really look back and you're like, wow, man, how instrumental was Rasheed Wallace to that team? Because I think Mehmet Okur was the starter when he, when they got Wallace, and then they inserted Wallace in there, and he just brought, what he brought to that team, man? He brought another piece of toughness that they really needed up front. I never thought Okur was that tough, where he can push them through, but once they got Wallace, Lou, it was all over.
And I think something that also to me, Steve, about Rasheed Wallace, he was a tough guy. He was smart, a very, very smart basketball player, and, I know he wanted to get into coaching, and I think he did, after retirement, and just a very brilliant guy out there, and, mentally and physically,
Yeah. Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, playing in North Carolina for 2 years, even when he was in Portland all those years, you know how you can tell if a guy has a high basketball IQ, Lou, if you're really looking close at a game, if you're at a game especially, watch them on defense when they're off the ball, when their man doesn't have the ball. If they're in the proper position, if they're communicating, like there's one thing about Draymond Green that I noticed, even when he was at Michigan State is when I first noticed it. He was awesome. He was like a traffic cop in Times Square in New York City, directing traffic. He always knew where guys needed to be. He told guys where to go. That's the mark of a guy with a high IQ.
Yeah. Oh, and and again, he could get under the skin. I know it cost him a couple of games, being suspended or, with the technicals and whatnot. But boy, boy, you're right. He definitely was the difference maker in that team. Couple of interesting things, Steve, before we get into the Pistons run, going into the playoffs that year, or two teams that didn't make the playoffs were the Portland Trailblazers and the Utah Jazz. Significant to that ended, I think, 21 straight years that the Blazers made the playoffs, and Utah was 20. And just incredible runs. You hear about the Red Wings with their 25 years in a row and all that. In my hat's off to those two teams. That's hard to do in the NBA.
No, it is, and who went through that too, and they're hoping to get back, and I think they will get back soon. Is the San Antonio Spurs?
Yeah.
I know this. I don't know the exact amount of years, but the Spurs were in the playoffs. Like I think it was 21, maybe 22 years in a row, until 3 years ago when they didn't get in, and obviously they got Victor in the draft. So hopefully they can turn it around and get back in there. But yeah, when it goes up and it's up and down, Lou. It's up and down. Some organizations got the consistency. My New York Knicks. I don't want to get off the topic.
No, you're good.
But my Knicks, they're making some strides now. They got another player this past week that's going to really, really help them, and Mikal Bridges. And the one thing I hope, though, I hope they get rid of Julius Randle somehow, because I just don't think he is going to be a guy that keeps them going, pushes them through, gets them to the next level. There's something about Randle. Lou, I have a list of players in the NBA that they're great scorers, they're great offensive players, they sell tickets, they sell jerseys, they may have a signature shoe, they do commercials, but they're missing the winning DNA.
Yeah.
And I have a group of those guys that I've written down. Actually, I put it on a card somewhere. And yesterday, Paul George, or today, he's on that list. He's one of those guys. Philly just picked him up.
Yeah.
And Lou, I just think Randall and him, and there's others in the league, James Harden, that just won't get you to the championship caliber that all those Pistons players had in 2004, like Phillips, Hamilton, the Wallace, the two Wallaces that you mentioned. Even Tayshaun Prince. We can't forget about Tayshaun.
No. Oh, my gosh. Obviously that block that will live in infamy against Reggie Miller in the final. And everybody forgets about that, about that Indiana Pacers team, Steve. They won 61 games that year. They were the number one seed. But before we get to that, they got to the, obviously I mentioned they played the Bucks. I think they lost game 2 at home, but this was the year they went to 7 games for the opening round. And then they played the Nets in that rematch. And,
Yeah.
you know, they won the first 2, but then lost 3 straight. Remember that triple overtime game they lost at the Palace? Well,
Yeah.
that oh
Yeah.
boy.
That's when they had the 2-3-2 format, right?
Yes, yes.
Or I know they had it in the finals, but I remember the Nets being up 3-2, and then the Pistons won the last 2. But speaking of that, I remember one of those games that I watched. I probably watched them all, but I remember one game. Lou, I was thinking about it today. The one thing that stood out, and it's got nothing to do with winning, but that announcer, the public address announcer at the Palace,
Yeah.
when I watched that last game and he did the starting lineup for the Pistons, Lou, I forgot about the chills that it used to give me just listening to him announcing the players coming out on the court. And you just knew it, man, that the Pistons were going to win that night in Game 7.
Oh yeah. You know, and it's so funny is they went they gave up 75 and 69 points in those last 2 games against the Nets. Holy cow. And you know, obviously we could spend an hour talking about how it's different now 20 years later, but you know, that was so crazy. And then of course, you know, we talk about you know, I think they held Jason Kidd scoreless in Game 7 of that.
Did.
Holy man. And
they did. I remember that kid was getting a lot of criticism in the paper, in the New York paper the next day. Could you imagine if social media was as relevant as it is today, and a kid like Kidd, and I don't even know what the social media situation was back then in 2004. If there really was, maybe there was Facebook and
I don't even know. There wasn't
or something. But there was no sports talk shows the next day criticizing guys like they do today. I mean,
it's incredible.
God, if you have a bad game, if you have a bad shooting game today, they go bananas. These people, all they do is just throw darts at athletes now. And I say to myself, wait a minute. Can a basketball player have a poor shooting night one day? What's the big deal?
There's no such thing. There's no patience in sports for anything, for winning, for a bad night. It's all, everybody's got amnesia, and it sickens me to watch it. You know, it's like, you know, I watch, you know, I'm a big hockey guy, and they're vilifying Steve Yzerman because he doesn't, you know, he didn't get the big names. It's like they want to win now, and you just can't do it. But, you know, I don't mean to digress, but that's, you know.
No, but that's okay. But Lou, now that you mentioned hockey, I watched Game 7 the other night with Edmonton in Florida. Hey, Lou, I'm telling you right now, I'm a basketball guy first.
Yeah.
There's nothing in the sports world as good as a Game 7 in a hockey playoffs. There's nothing, Lou.
Oh boy, and it was quite the game. It was so much fun to watch, that's for sure. So
Lou, yeah. Those last 3-4 minutes were amazing.
Oh, they were. Keep you right on the edge of your seat. So we talk about playing Indiana in that semifinal, and you know, again, if you'd have told me that would have been the last, you know, big push for the Pacers, I'd have said you're crazy. I mean, you know, Reggie Miller had a great career. You know, he's a great basketball mind. You know, they beat them in a 6-game series. Again, another defensive series. That was the tone of the playoffs back then for the Pistons, for sure.
Yeah, it was. I remember that too when it was 4-2. I think, like you said, Indiana's record during the season. But Wallace, you know, like I said, he was a main factor. I mean, Jermaine O'Neal was okay.
Yeah.
Meta World Peace was on that team, I believe. Jamel Tinsley was their point guard, but that was a great series. But that block, you know, there's always one or two things. There's always one or two things that stand out from a series from years ago. And like you said, the block was amazing. It was just, and the way they played defense on Indiana in that series, and like they did it against everyone. And everyone knows Larry Brown's mantra was play the right way. And that's what they did. But when Prince came, and Reggie Miller, like most guys would dunk that ball, that fast break that he had. But obviously at his age, he probably wasn't going to dunk. He probably wouldn't even dunk it in his younger days. But most guys dunked that. And he went up and just tried to lay it off the backboard, and Prince just came out of nowhere.
And, you know, I look at these scores of that series, okay? And the highest scoring game, Detroit had 85 in Game 3, and they won, they won game 6, 69-65, and they won game 1, or they lost, or they won game 2, 72-67. My goodness, now that's a halftime score in some of these games. It's again, it's just such a different mindset back then.
Could you imagine today? I keep referring to sports talk radio,
Yeah,
podcasters, social media. Could you imagine how fans and hosts would be roasting both of those teams if that was our championship that we had a couple of weeks ago with Boston? Could you imagine how people would be criticized? People would be saying, I remember when the Spurs, I think, played the Cavaliers in the finals. And I remember people saying how boring it was because the scores were low. People never really bought into the Spurs. With the guys they had, they said they were boring, but they were so fundamentally sound. And I just said to myself, no, you guys have it all wrong. So with those amount of points that were being scored, could you imagine? I mean, what it would be like today with everyone talking about it?
Oh, I know. It's absolutely. It's incredible to think about it's just amazing. We're joined by Steve Finamore, our NBA expert historian. Always great conversation talking basketball with Steve. Now we get to the finals. Obviously, they were underdogs going against the Lakers. They had such a dynasty back then with Shaquille and Kobe, and then of course they picked up Gary Payton and Karl Malone, and that was supposed to be their run to get their title. And one of the stats that stood out to me in that series was game 2 when they did beat Detroit. The assist leader in that game was Luke Walton, who ended up being a coach for a while, after his playing career. Just a crazy stat that I found. I thought was kind of interesting.
Hey, speaking of game 2, if you remember, the Pistons had a 3-point lead with 10 seconds left.
Oh boy.
And there's a late game situation that I follow closely. I actually used to track it for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And we call it the foul or defend situation.
Yes.
And what that is, for listeners who maybe not know what that is, but when you're on defense and you're up by 3 points and the other team has the ball, obviously, do you foul them to send them to the line to stop them from shooting a 3 and tying the game?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Pistons, at the time, no one probably even gave it a thought. If the Pistons decided to foul LA, Kobe never gets that 3 off and ties the game and sends it into overtime. But, it's something you can look back and say, Monday morning quarterback, maybe they should have fouled, but that was some shot by Kobe.
Oh boy.
And I remember someone saying they asked one of the so-called analysts or experts, who do you like in the series? And he said something along the lines of, the Lakers in 4, the Pistons can't score. and I laughed at that. And I got to be honest, I thought the Lakers were going to beat them too.
I did too.
Really did. I thought Peyton and Karl Malone were going to finally get their ring. Mm-hmm. I thought Shaq and Kobe were just unstoppable. But you know what the great thing about the Pistons defense was? They can switch every ball screen, and they were so smart. Like you mentioned Wallace's IQ. Ben Wallace was a smart SOB also. And Tayshaun Prince was very smart. And then you had Billups and Hamilton in the backcourt, who were excellent defenders and very smart players. So they came, they came together. And that was the one thing about that Pistons team. They had guys who bought into their roles. And like, Brown always said, they played the right way.
And I look back on that and I looked at the stats, and I can see Shaquille O'Neal's, his facial expressions, especially after game 3, how frustrated he was because, like you said, the body that were being put on him by Ben Wallace and Rasheed Wallace and whatnot. I mean, Wallace had 22 rebounds in game 5. He had 13 in game 4, 11 in game 3, 14 in game 2. I mean, he was right there, and that was the driving force. I know Shaquille had 34 points in game 1, but they put the bodies on Kobe. You knew they were going to get their points, Steve, but it just, you're right. I don't think they were prepared to see that kind of defense. coming out of the West.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, you mentioned the 3-point shooting earlier in the show. I looked up the stats today, and I looked at Kobe's 3-point shooting in the series. He was 4 for 23. Now, I'm not saying Kobe was a great 3-point shooter, but, they did a really good job on him. He made that big one to force overtime, but, the 3-ball, Lou, there'll be times I'll be sitting at my table at night, and I'll look back, and I'll look at the stats from years ago, and it just boggles my mind how the 3-point shot wasn't even a weapon back then. And the numbers, Lou, the numbers were so low that I forgot about how, relatively the usage was so low. But now today's game, it's like you got the Celtics, they led the league in 3-point field goal attempts, and the Dallas Mavericks, their opponent in the finals, they were second in the league. And you see these guys coming down. And I got to tell you, Lou, it really wears off on these kids. I coach middle school basketball. I watch a lot of high school. And, Lou, these kids are jacking up the 3. But, the Pistons, they never relied on that. They didn't need that.
No, you're absolutely right. It's funny is I look back on even back when the Bad Boys were playing, and I'd see Bill Laimbeer shoot that 3-pointer, and I'd cringe, but my goodness, he would make it because it was a novelty. They didn't come out and put a hand in his face. And I'm like, hey, you know what? If you're going to leave him wide open, why not?
Hey, Lou, when we're talking about the 2004 Pistons here, we can't forget about Darko.
Lou, boy.
That draft pick will go down in history as one of the most head scratching. Why did he do that? But hey, Darko got a ring, man, his rookie year, so something good came out of it, right?
Could you imagine if if they would have had Carmelo Anthony sit in the bench instead of Darko, or Dwayne Wade off of that draft class? Oh my goodness,
and wasn't Chris Bosh in that class?
He sure was.
So you got three Hall of Famers, and then you got Darko. And look, I'm not second guessing the Pistons. I don't like doing that with drafts. I have a friend who all he does is talk about the draft years later. I'm not really into that, but could you? I said to myself today when I was researching, I said we got to talk about Darko's selection.
Oh God, yeah.
And what didn't help him was playing for Larry Brown, because Larry Brown was notorious for not playing rookies and giving them a hard time.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not saying if he played for someone else, Carlisle, Flip Saunders, who came on next, I don't know if things would have been differently, but that was a tough lineup to crack, because I think they had Corliss Williamson up front and Eldon Campbell. Eldon Campbell was up front too.
Yes, they did.
So it would have been hard for Darko to crack that rotation. But, Lou, I hate to bring it up for the Pistons fans, but that 2004 draft, 2003 draft will go down in history.
Well, you want to know what's funny is I and I remember this, and I looked it up too the other day. They were kind of ahead of their time, because if you think back, they had 3 draft picks that year, 2 in the first round, 1 in the second. Darko, Carlos Delfino from Argentina, and Andres Glinadakis from Greece. Nobody from the States. And so, now that's commonplace, but they didn't take anybody from the United States.
And it's gotten really, really crazy now with the international players from the other night's draft. A friend of mine told me the other night, we were texting during the draft, and he really thinks in a couple of years, all the selections in the first round, not all of them, but half of them are going to be international. And Lou, I don't know about you, but I like the format that the NBA went to, having 2 days of the draft. Because I'll tell you, in the past, that second round would keep you up past 11 o'clock, 11:30. And I just thought it got so boring. I actually watched the next day, round 2, because I wanted to see where Bronny James would go. But, hey, one point about Larry Brown, I gotta tell you this. He's my all-time favorite basketball coach, and I've always loved Larry Brown. And second, he only spent 2 years with the Pistons.
Yeah.
They were 54 and 28 both years, And they went to the finals both years.
Yep.
I mean, let's not forget the next year after 2004, they made it to the finals again.
Yeah, and you can argue about referee calls all you want,
I know.
and that game 5 or whatever, it was game 6 or whatever.
Yep.
It's just like the phantom foul on Kareem in 1988. So, but hey, you know what? The way I look at it, Steve, is Detroit got there back-to-back years, and as any Piston fan in this generation, they would take that right now and run with back-to-back final appearances.
Yeah, the one problem with Brown, and everyone criticizes him for, and they always throw it at me, is he always bounced around different teams. And I'll never forget when he went to the Knicks the next year, I was so excited.
Yeah.
And I was actually working in New York. I was coaching at St. Peter's College, and I actually got a chance to go to one of his practices.
Oh, wow.
And I tell you what, Lou, I was in heaven. I couldn't believe it. I was watching my idol out there, and I got a chance to talk to him. And you just think back, and you're like, wow, man, 2 years in Detroit, 54 and 28, both years, finals appearances, one championship, of course.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing. Like, and Lou, listen, you can say all you want from the outside. Oh, it's easy to coach this team. It's easy to coach that team. It is so hard. I mean, you look at the Los Angeles Lakers right now.
Oh.
What Darvin Ham had to go through, what Monty Williams had to go through. This isn't easy, man. This is not easy. This is hard. Coaching is hard, especially at that level. But Larry Brown went in there with all those personalities, and then when I really think the North Carolina connection.
Yeah,
with Rasheed Wallace and Larry Brown, I think that really helped them too, because I think Wallace really, really respected Larry Brown.
So I got to ask you a question. I know we're going to get off topic real quick with this question, but I got to ask you this about right now with the Lakers. Okay, they drafted Bronny James, and they get all this with JJ Redick and whatnot. It just, to me, this to me is kind of a slap in the face to Laker history, and I'll tell you why. It's because this is like a nostalgic season, and to me, they're not playing for a championship. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just think guys like Kareem and Magic, and God rest his soul, Jerry West, they got to be. This did not seem like a draft to build them a championship. I think they're placating them, and it's almost like they're playing to put asses in the seats. Am I wrong here?
This is really, it's a broad topic, and you just mentioned a couple of Laker greats. Let's not forget about how is Kobe Bryant feeling about this right now. But Lou, this is how. Look, I'm gonna go down the middle here, Lou, and right. my wife hates when I do this, but
no,
I see things from both sides.
Okay.
I really, really do. I see the argument from both sides. I'm not leaning towards one over the other, but here's the thing, Lou, and I meant to do this the past 2 nights I'm sitting here at my table. I meant to go back to every draft in the last 10 years and see who the number 55 pick was in the draft and see if they made any kind of impact, if they played. And I just want to say, I watched Bronny James play 4 times last year. 4 times I watched him play. And I really enjoyed watching him play.
Okay.
He shared his number one passion is sharing the ball. He comes down and he looks to distribute the ball. Okay. Here's my things, Lou. Number 2, he's gonna be a 12th man, if that. And he'll be in the G League often. He'll be playing in the G League for sure. Now, my thing is LeBron going to give JJ Redick, heat for putting him in the game? Now then I think that becomes a problem, because there's guys like, you got a guy like Max Christie on the bench, and there's a couple other guys that play his position probably. How is that going to look? You know what I mean? So I think LeBron James has earned enough equity to have a little bit of say in this. I really do, man.
Okay.
Because I don't.
All right.
I know LeBron gets a lot of heat. I know he gets a lot of accolades. But Lou, what this guy has done for the game, man, is just incredible. So I get it from both sides, Lou. I really do. Fair
enough. That's I totally get it. I look at it as a legacy pick, but you bring up some fair points. It's you know what? That's a great idea. I think I'm going to do that too tonight when we're done. When I'm sitting on the couch watching TV with my wife, I'll go on my computer and look at those 55 picks from the last decade. That'll be
yeah. And Lou, here's another thing with nepotism. I hear that a lot
oh boy.
the last couple of nights. But see, here's the thing. Coaches do the same exact thing.
Yes.
And no one says anything. Like the late Wes Unseld, when he was a coach, he hired his son.
Mm-hmm.
Bernie Bickerstaff hired his son, J.B. Bickerstaff.
Yep.
Now, those are just two off the top of my head that I can think of. Now, but like it happens in college. Phil Martelli hired his son. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It happens. Coaches hire their sons. Yeah. So this is almost like the Lakers hiring LeBron's son. You know what I mean?
There you go.
So I definitely don't buy into the nepotism. And people are mentioning it, but look, like I said, Lou, I think LeBron earned a right to have a say, and I'm really hoping that JJ does well, because I really like JJ Redick. I'm gonna miss him on the telecast because I think he brings a lot to the game. And I hope he does well. I hope he doesn't. I think he might turn into a Steve Nash type, though. So we got to be careful about that.
Well, it definitely will. He'll definitely have the spotlight. Everybody in the world will be watching him. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, Lou, let's not forget when you talk about no experience. Doc Rivers and Jason Kidd had no experience, and they both got head coaching jobs. So it's been done before, and Steve Nash obviously, but. We'll see. Let's see what happens.
And I'll say this last thing that I've got about JJ, and a guy that I like to listen to that I'm sure you listened to back in the day in New York on the radio, Mike and the Mad Dog. The Mad Dog, he said that whenever he was on the set with Stephen A. with JJ Redick, he said he never met a smarter basketball mind because he did his homework and he did his, he was X's and O's. He's one of the smartest kids, or I call him a kid, younger guys coming up. So he thinks, that, and that says a lot. He's outspoken, but if you're smart, I mean, that's got to lend something.
His podcast is gold. I listened to every episode he had, and it was gold. He was with LeBron James. Yeah. I don't know if you heard Mind the Game. I highly recommend it to anyone. If you really want to learn about the ins and outs of the game, I mean, he goes deep. It's not your normal podcast, talk show.
Yeah.
They talk basketball, X's and O's, and they talk about the mental side of the game and obviously the physical side of it. But they break down plays. They break down philosophies. You want to talk about basketball IQ. Even when Redick played, who thought J.J. Redick was going to last 15 years in the NBA?
Years. Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, so look, Lou, I hate to say this, but I know I mentioned coaching is hard before, but I don't think it takes a 20-year assistant coaching resume to get a head coaching job. Plus, he played all those years. He's been around a lot of coaches. Let's see what happens and let it all shake out.
All right, let's spend a few minutes here talking about, like we promised, about the 84 champion Boston Celtics.
Yeah.
But you want to know it's kind of ironic or whatever is
what's that?
In 83, remember how they didn't fire him, but Bill Fitch quit because they had a change of ownership with the Celtics back then, and Casey Brown took over. So here we go. Casey Jones. That's right. Just like the Pistons 20 years earlier. The Celtics got beat by a very, very good Philadelphia team, if I'm not mistaken. They ended up winning the championship that year. But, it was a little change in the way they did things with Bill Fitch gone. And he went to Houston about 3 weeks later to be the head coach, if I'm not mistaken. But they brought Casey Jones in, and you talk about a smart basketball mind. That was him, one of the most quietest coaches I think I've ever seen in my lifetime.
When I started following the game in the early to mid 70s,
mm-hmm.
the Baltimore Bullets were my squad.
Okay.
And they later became the Capitol Bullets, then the Washington Bullets. And Casey Jones led them. He was the head coach. He led them to the NBA championship where they lost to the Golden State Warriors in 77. or I believe it was 75 maybe, or it was 75, 76 maybe, one of those years. And Casey, I knew about Casey Jones for years. And the one thing that I never liked about Bill Fitch, by the way, he was Phil Jackson's college coach.
Oh, wow.
The one thing I never liked about Bill Fitch was he was like a militant, my way or the highway type. He is responsible for running Pistol Pete Maravich out of the game. Pistol came back. Pistol got picked up by the Celtics, and he played half a season. And then the following season, he came back, and in training camp, they said, stories have it, Bill Fitch ran him into the ground, verbally abused him. And Pistol Pete said, I don't need this. I'm out of here. And he retired, and he was never heard from again. So when I think of Bill Fitch, I was happy. And like you said, the Sixers team from that year was awesome, man. With Moses Malone and those guys, I mean, they were awesome. But, yeah, that 84 team I was talking about the other night with some friends, and that was the year the Celtics picked up Dennis Johnson, if you remember DJ.
Oh, boy, how could I forget him? He, with the Phoenix Suns, with some of the runs of those teams, like, that team was so good. And that, obviously they had that epic series against the Lakers that we could talk to in a little bit. But you and I have talked on my previous shows about those Knicks teams in that playoff year, and and that series against the Pistons that the Knicks had in that year, when remember when they had to play at Joe Louis Arena because there was something going on with the Silverdome. And they said one of the games, you talk about, how hot it got in the Boston Garden. They were saying it was almost 120 on the floor in one of those games with the Knicks and the Pistons at Joe Louis, man. That was a series I'll never forget.
Yeah, Bernard King was a killer, and he was doing all that with 4 dislocated fingers on both hands. And he had his fingers, if you look closely, if you watch those games on film, he had his fingers taped up, and I don't think players tape their fingers together anymore. They sit out. If they have a problem with dislocated fingers, players sit out today. But Bernard had them wrapped up, and he killed Kelly Tripucka that series. And I'll tell you what, Lou, man, we couldn't wait, or the Knicks fans couldn't wait for the Celtics series. The Celtics beat them in 7 games that year.
Yeah.
And Lou, I tell you, man, what a matchup. Bird against Bernard King. Cedric Maxwell actually guarded Bernard King a lot. But the Bernard King matchup was one of the greatest forward matchups I've ever seen. And that series went 7-2. But that Celtics team, man, when they struggled with Andrew Toney, the Philadelphia 76ers scorer. So the Celtics had Nate Archibald as their point guard the year before. So they needed a guy. They needed a defensive stopper in the backcourt because Danny Ainge wasn't guarding anyone. So they went out and got Dennis Johnson, and he was the guy who helped them, amongst others, immensely with that 84 championship run. Which, by the way, Lou, 84, here's a little history tidbit. I bought a VCR and a pack of 8 VHS tapes from Kodak. I bought them all in one day at an electronics store in Times Square. I went home that night and I started taping the Lakers Celtics games, the championship, and I had them on tape and I would watch them over and over and over. But of course, I threw them away at some point. But that was the first year I bought a VCR and a VHS.
Wow, that's hilarious. All I remember, that's great. It's funny is that series, you talk about the Lakers or the Celtics and the Knicks, coming off of that heartbreaking loss. I can remember, man, I thought, well, I was still PO'd at the Knicks for beating my Pistons, but that lasted about probably one half. That I remembered how much I didn't like the Celtics, and I became a Knicks fan for that series. And maybe I was the Maloik for the Knicks because they ended up losing that series in 7. But that, a lot of people don't remember that series, how difficult that was, how close that series. Each team won on their home court, which is what a lot of them did back in the 80s. Home court advantage. Steve, talk about that. How big that was back in the 80s with these series.
Oh, man, those crowds in all those arenas. Lou, you should have heard Madison Square Garden during those times. We used to go to all the games. The New York Knicks in the 80s, they had a special promotion for high school students. If you showed your high school ID card at the window, you can buy an $8 ticket way upstairs in the blue section, the top level, $8. You can buy it for half price for $4. And at the time, believe this or not, the Knicks weren't selling out every game. They would sell out against the Lakers when LA showed up for one game during the year. They'd sell out for the Celtics and they'd sell out for the Sixers. Everyone else, there was always empty seats, a lot of tickets on sale. So, Lou, we went to all the games. And the Garden, man, I haven't been in many NBA arenas, but the Garden used to rock like no other, man. I'll never forget it. The funny thing about that was after the Celtics beat the Knicks in that 7-game series, the Celtics went on and played the Bucks and kicked their butt.
Yeah. Oh God, they did. That was weird.
I was like, God, we could have beat this Bucks team, because the Bucks never really. They had some good offensive players, Marcus Johnson, Moncrief, and those guys, but they were never really a team that was going to break through. I feel bad for them and the Atlanta Hawks from the 70s and 80s. They can never really get through the tough Eastern Conference teams. But yeah, man, the Celtics had like a cakewalk, and we were telling these Bucks fans, we made it hard on them, and then they went into the finals, of course, as you well know.
Yeah, it was. That was strange. It was almost like a letdown, and it was almost like it wasn't a letdown for the Celtics, but the Bucks. I remember that they looked so they looked so outmanned, just psychologically going into that series, and Bob Lanier had no he had no answer for Parrish or anything.
No, never. It was amazing.
Here's a player too off of that Celtics team that I think doesn't get enough credit is Gerald Henderson. And
forget it.
He would get Detroit in some of those later series with some clutch shots. And he led the Celtics a couple of times in assists in the playoffs, especially against the Knicks and the Lakers.
Hey, he came off the bench for Boston that year, and I always remember him being a spark plug. And he bought into his role, and he knew, hey, I'm going to be in the game at the end of the game. I don't know what game it was, which number it was against the Lakers in the finals, but do you remember when James Worthy, when the Lakers had a lead, a 2-point lead with about 20 seconds left, and the Lakers were bringing the ball up, and Worthy threw the ball away, right? Gerald Henderson stole it and went in for the layup and tied the game. And those are the kind of little things that Henderson did. And he applied a lot of pressure on defense, too. He was a tough little guard, and that really helped him, like you said.
Game 3. I just saw it. He stole the James Worthy pass. That was good. 13 seconds left to force overtime.
There you go. I'll never forget that.
And who hits? Okay, you'll see if you remember this. Who hit the clutch shot with 14 seconds left in overtime? Scotty Wedman.
Yeah, Scotty Wedman. He was some player. He was some shooter.
Wow.
He was another guy who bought into his role. He was a starter, and when he played for Kansas City, Omaha Kings, it was him, Phil Ford, Ernie Grunfeld, Sam Lacey, Bill Robinson. Scott Wedman was one of the leading scorers. When he went to the Celtics, he took a seat. He didn't mind taking a seat because he wanted to win a championship like Bill Walton did in '86 when he came to Boston.
Sure. And then, of course.
Look, Lou, you need those guys.
Yeah.
Like you look at this year's Celtics team. Al Horford is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Al just fits in. Drew Holiday, he's another guy.
Yep.
And I know he started, but he's another guy. Drew Holiday and Al Horford will do anything you want for the team to win.
Yep.
And with Wedman and Gerald Henderson, you needed guys like that were going to help you, win ball games.
So we got to talk about the clothesline. Kevin McHale clotheslining Kurt Rambis.
Yeah.
And then, again, Larry Bird hits that shot, and then Magic misses the free throws, and and then ML Carr steals the pass, the inbounds pass. It's just, man, what a game that was.
Hey, Magic, speaking of Irvin, he didn't have a great series. He made a couple of blunders, And I remember a writer or someone, a fan, or they gave him the nickname Tragic Johnson. Because I remember he made a couple of bad things, and the free throw miss, you said, but that clothesline, that set everything off. Remember when Kareem got in Larry Bird's face and they were arguing with each other?
Oh,
I mean, that series, I think it was ML Carr who was quoted as saying, it's a war now. It's a war.
yeah.
And Lou, going back to that book that I referred to earlier in the broadcast,
Yeah.
when the game was war, they talked about those Celtics, Lakers, Pistons, Sixers, even the Chicago Bulls.
Yeah.
Lou, I'm sorry, but I don't want to be the old. I turned 60 last month. I don't want to be the old man that says get off my lawn.
Yeah.
But I'm just stating facts here, man. And I get the game today. It's exciting, threes, this and that.
Yeah.
But Lou, I'm sorry. In that series alone, there was 8 Hall of Famers. In that series alone, there was 8 Hall of Famers. How many Hall of Famers were in the Celtics Mavericks series? But 8. And Kareem, Magic, James Worthy, and then the Celtics. We'll never see this. We'll never see that decade again, Lou.
No.
Sorry.
No. And you want to know what's crazy about that series? That was the 8th time that those two teams met in the finals, and the Lakers or the Celtics that was their 8th straight series win. How great those franchises were back then. The Celtics were so dominant over the Lakers. They had their number all the way back, when they're back in the 60s and whatnot. It's amazing.
Hey, I don't think the late Jerry West ever beat the Celtics in the finals.
No, wasn't it your Knicks in the finals?
Yeah.
I don't mean to bring that up, but
No. He beat the Knicks. Jerry West. How about this? Talk about podcasters, social media. Jerry West was 1-8 in the NBA Finals.
Crazy.
Could you imagine if he was playing today? Can you imagine if LeBron James was 1-8 in the finals?
He'd get vilified worse than he already is.
Oh my God. And that's the one thing the players didn't have to deal with back then.
Yeah.
And we don't know how their mental state would be if they had to deal with all that stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was crazy. It was crazy. And Lou, I love watching the old games. I love going on YouTube.
Yeah.
The other night, not to get off topic, but the other night I was watching 1986 NCAA tournament, Michigan State against Kansas.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm watching that game, and I'm like, these guys are like men, grown men.
Yeah. Isn't that well, it's again, we could spend an hour talking about this. They don't stay in the college game for more than 2 years. If they're halfway decent, they go pro, or now we got the portal,
And some guys aren't even coming to college out of high school.
Yeah, that's right.
They're going for the Ignite, the G League, overseas. At different times, Lou. Times have changed.
I want to wrap it up here. Now you talk about the Celtic team that won it, and I go back. Remember how they built it. Obviously, they had Larry Bird. It's if I'm not mistaken, Steve, he got drafted the year before, but stayed at Indiana State and played his senior year. And then, of course, the Lakers got Magic. But to me, the catalyst, I think, to really get that team going was that trade they made with Golden State.
Oh, yeah.
To get Robert Parrish. They traded their first pick, which turned out to be Joe Barry Carroll, or Joe Barely Cares, whatever you want to call him. And they ended up drafting Kevin McHale with that draft pick they got in return. My gosh, boy, Red Auerbach looked like he was a genius, but he looked even smarter back then.
No, he found a way.
Oh,
he found a way in 1978 to pick Bird. He chose Bird, and he didn't care if he was going back, but nobody did things like that.
No.
And he went 6th in the draft, and he went back and played for Indiana State, and we all know how that turned out.
Yeah.
And then the next year, here's the thing. When I talked to a couple of my friends, we mentioned the fact that people have said this Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark reminds them of Magic and Larry Bird. I said, wait a minute, you're missing one thing here. When Magic was a rookie in LA, he led them to the NBA championship as a rookie.
Yeah.
Larry Bird's rookie season, Lou, they won 61 games before McHale and Parrish got there. They won won games where Bird is a rookie. If you remember, Bird got Rookie of the Year.
Yeah.
And Lou, the year before, Boston only won 29 games. So don't tell me Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark's doing all this, blah, blah, blah. If they're not even they're not even in the playoffs right now.
No.
I think one's 8 and one's 9.
Yeah.
Lift your team up, make your teammates better, and then I'll open my eyes and watch.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, and to me, you know, I don't know. I've gone back and forth on it with them, you know, with her not making the Olympic team or whatever. And in my opinion, you know, getting off topic, I think when you pick an Olympic team, you pick a team that wins. The objective to go to the Olympics to me is to win, not to put eyeballs on your sport. But I also, my other thing with those two is that's an unfair comparison to compare them to Bird and Magic. That puts even more pressure on them because you're right. They're not going to win a championship.
Hey, do you see what the WNBA All-Star format is this year?
No.
The 10 All-Stars are being chosen, and they're going to play the United States Olympic team in the All-Star game.
Wow. Okay.
So Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are going to wind up playing the United States team in Phoenix. And that's going to be an interesting game because the girls who make the All-Star team, obviously on the Olympic team, they're going to play for USA. But
yeah.
I love Caitlin Clark. I think what she's doing is amazing, and she's brought so much more interest to the girls' game. I got a confession to make. I haven't missed one of her games yet, so I really enjoy watching her play, and I think it's great for basketball.
Well, Steve, this has been an absolute treat. It's always fun looking back at the NBA, the history of it, and talking about the present day. Thank you for taking time out to be with us tonight on Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History, and look forward to catching up to you again real soon, talking more hoops.
Hey, likewise, Lou. Anytime you want me on, I'm more than willing. And have a great night, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Hi, everybody. Captain Lou here from 12 Ounce Sports, and of course, the Captain Lou Extravaganza and Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History. Hey, if you're like me, you love to go to ball games. Baseball, football, basketball, whatever. Minor league baseball, especially this summer, there's nothing better than a Saturday night game, Major League or Minor League Baseball Sunday afternoon. I've got the place for you to go to get those tickets for those games. Tickets.12ouncesports.com. We are a ticket broker, which means we don't charge you the exorbitant fees that you might see on some of those other secondary markets. Hey, if there's a concert you want to go to this summer, tickets.12ouncesports.com. Use the promo code 12ounce as well, and you'll get a better discount. Tickets.12ouncesports.com. It's that simple. Can't say it enough. For the best prices on tickets this summer, make sure you go to tickets.12ouncesports.com. All right, everybody, that was a look back at the 2004 Go to Work Detroit Pistons, the NBA World Champions that year. And as we mentioned, they went into that series quite the underdog against the Los Angeles Lakers and won it in a gentleman's sweep, if you will. And if it weren't for a lucky three-point shot by Kobe Bryant at the end of regulation in Game 2, it definitely would have been a sweep. I say lucky because he had a hand in his face. It was a beautiful shot. It was just, you know, very fortunate for the Lakers to get that one to go in. But the Pistons were indeed world champions. They went to the finals, as we mentioned, the following year and got beaten 7 games by another dynasty, that being the San Antonio Spurs. So we want to thank Steve Finamore, our NBA guest insider, historian, guru, whatever you want to call him. Always a lot of great facts. He's got so much knowledge when it comes to basketball at the college and the NBA level. It's always a treat, and some great insight on the 2004 Detroit Pistons, and a bonus look at a team that won it 40 years ago, the Boston Celtics of 1984. What a great time it was for the NBA back in the 80s with the Lakers and with the Celtics, and then the Detroit Pistons, Chicago Bulls, and also the Philadelphia 76ers. So we want to thank Steve Finamore for joining us and helping us take a look back at our first championship team of 2004, that being the Detroit Pistons. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History, 2004 and the Detroit Pistons. Brought to you, as always, by Tickets.12ouncesports And of course, the official coffee of the Captain Lou Sports Network and 12 Ounce Sports, that being Javi Coffee. If you go to javicoffee.com, you'll see all the great flavors, and make sure you use the promo code Captain Lou for 15% off of your purchase. Don't forget to join us again soon for another edition of Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History. And on Wednesday nights, join us as always for the Captain Lou Extravaganza, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on 12 Ounce Sports and the Captain Lou Sports Network. This will be available on Apple Podcast as well, starting in a couple of days, so make sure you look for that. All right, everybody, until next time, Captain Lou saying keep your heads up, keep your sticks down, keep your feet moving, and as always, keep your minds open.